Romago Carlock. Tom Billishaw on top of Tucker Fraud. Octa Jima Orm Gurcoil Midge Jess. Le Ruddy Araha Ata Inti. Minister, it is a very hard time to be a small business operator, to be a sole trader. The cost of doing business is high and the amount of cash available to people to spend is getting less and less. These are bad conditions for a business to operate in, and at times like these, people who are self-employed do need support and help. This is not to say we should subsidise or prop up unviable businesses, but that we support people in making a living and staying at work. Keeping people in work is a vital role government must play in an economic crisis, such as the one we have been experiencing now for nearly 4 years. The government members will probably agree with that statement, but certainly in the case of taxi drivers, you are doing the exact opposite. There are some issues which make the taxi industry slightly unique, but not so much that this approach is impossible or wrong. Taxi drivers are business people and workers. Their business place, their car, which they are in nearly all cases never fully own, is their office. And while they do not have to contend with upward-only rents, the government is intent on making it hard for them to do business, even in this already difficult climate. There is no denying business is bad for taxi drivers, and something needs to change, but this bill offers little. In the time it took to complete the Indicom report, which was carried out as part of the taxi industry review, 1,000 vehicles left the industry. But there is still an oversupply of taxis on our streets, and there is a large number of reasons. When it was established that the previous regulatory system was not legal, the then government, Fianna Fáil, decided a better option than putting in place a new regulatory system was to allow a free-for-all. This PED-driven ideological move that the market could manage all regulation was the same ideology which allowed Shawnee Fitz and Fingleton to carry on unabated. Deregulation really became a problem when the economic circumstances of the state picked up considerably and people saw money in taxis they had never saw before. Soon there were 27,000 taxis on the roads, with a large portion of those in Dublin and other urban centres. At the time, there was business to be done, though just as the housing boom thundered on, no questions were asked about sustainability. In 2008, when the downturn had already begun, there was an estimated 100 million trips being taken in taxis each year. In 2012, it's estimated to be about 70 million. This does not represent another collapse, but when the number of taxis is high, it represents a lot of people fighting for the same business. Ranks which had moved quickly ground to a halt. Taxis were left circling, waiting for spaces. What once were tiring days of constant work for drivers became tiring days of desperately seeking business and counting again and again how much had been made this week and how much in arrears on the mortgage they were going to be. Taxi drivers are struggling and struggling hard. Far too many have in the past few years decided they have nothing to live for and have taken their own lives. No one can be certain of why these people chose that for themselves, but it is likely that the dire economic circumstances most faced was a mitigating factor. Their colleagues who survived them certainly believe this. It is believed 25 taxi drivers took their lives between 2008 and 2010. With these awful problems in mind, we must look to a way forward, and we must look at this bill and appraise how it seeks to deal with the problems in the industry. The first issue I have is a recognition of what the problems really are and prioritisation. The report of the Taxi Review Group did highlight the massive oversupply and the large downturn in demand. But this was not the major issue picked up by the government. The government did not decide that we must, if we plan to regulate this industry further, put in place regulations to make it sustainable. Instead, the Minister has decided to go for the red herring of tackling criminality. This is not to say that criminality should not be stamped out of the industry. It should, of course, and every decent, honest driver that represents the vast majority will agree with this. We already have laws against the criminal behaviour that does go on in the industry, but we have a Gardaí force unable to enforce them due to underfunding. This work has also been hampered by the massive swell in numbers of taxis due to deregulation. Policing the taxi industry is a serious job and cannot be done without resources. The reality is that the vast majority of taxi drivers have no convictions for an offence, drive their taxis within the law and never have an issue. The Minister asserts that there are 6,000 drivers with criminal offences. How many of these are non-payments of fines? There is a large proportion of people in Mountjoy because they did not pay their TV licence. 377 complaints were made about taxis in 2012. Given the 70 million trips that likely took place that year, it represents a very small number. People are actually happy with the service they get from taxis, and by and large feel safe as you could expect. In fact, taxi drivers are more likely to be victims of violence or crimes than their customers. People with convictions for murder or rape or sexual assault should not be allowed to drive people around in their cars for hire. I think it goes without saying. People who were convicted with minor offences 20 years ago and with no problem since, who are operating a taxi 10 years, should not be in fear of their employment, and even a suspension for a short period would put their business in jeopardy. The correct way to do this would be to limit the schedules included and to put in place a comprehensive vetting procedure at the point of entry, which has a standard threshold which must be met. Of course, we must protect the public, but we cannot play with people's livelihoods in this manner in order to act tough on crimes, when the crimes we are talking about are irrelevant to the job they are doing. The Minister will, I'm sure, try to paint this in a way to say that I want to allow rapists to drive taxis, as he has attempted on previous occasions when this issue was raised. This is nonsense, it's bluff and it's distraction. And as far as I can see, there are legal problems with impugning someone's rights to earn a living based on something totally irrelevant to their ability or inability to do the job. The real danger to the public is third taxi drivers operating vehicles on public roads with passengers. The Minister needs to take real steps to discourage people who are working 39 hours in another job from driving around the cities and towns of Ireland at night and on weekends. That is a matter of public safety being ignored here. An independent appeals process is also missing from this bill, as well as measures to ensure accountability on taxi policy from the NTA and Advisory Committee, which does not have the confidence of taxi drivers in my experience. These bodies should at least be directly accountable to Dáil Committee on a twice-yearly basis. The policy to deal with oversupply is not really in this bill. It has been implemented based on the previous taxi bill. That policy is to make things harder for as many taxi drivers as possible until enough are run out of the business. Cost after cost has been heaped upon drivers over the last year. Drivers have been asked to fork out for pointless branding signs, licence fees have gone up, NCT tests are gone up, fuel is up, cars must be newer and meet more stringent guidelines. I've met fathers and sons who have operated a taxi together as their only living for many years. The taxi was licensed to the father. As he was about to retire, a rule was put in place that cars being licensed to new people must be 3 years or newer. He could not afford to replace the car and transferability was ending, so his son is now out of the only business he knows. I have met drivers who bought new cars and in the process of licensing them, the regulations changed and the car could not be licensed without significant changes costing thousands of euros. Of course, we must have regulation, and I support the end of the process where taxi licences are sold on the open market, but we must do it in a way which works with the industry to allow for people to not lose their business or to be put out of business wrongly. These weren't criminals, these were people trying to make a living that this government's regulations cut out. Recently, I raised the issue of the introduction of new age limits on cars in relation to wheelchair access. Wheelchair accessible vehicles are very expensive, but it is government policy to expand the fleet of these vehicles. The requirement that vehicles be 3 years or newer entering and must leave the industry at 14 years makes it much more difficult for drivers to make a living with WAVs, as they are called. Of course, limits on vehicles should be put in place, but all of these vehicles sit NCTs. If they are on the road and faulty, then we really need to look at the NCT testing and not arbitrary lines in the sand. I accept these lines make it easier to ensure quality, but in the specific case of WAVs, it makes them less economically viable in all circumstances. The Minister refused to answer how we plan to offset this difficulty. He fobbed me off for a standard response from the NTA explaining age limits. Maybe he can deal with this today. The problem with these measures to tackle oversupply is they are completely indiscriminate, and in that respect, they end up hitting full-time, ordinary single-licence taxi drivers the hardest. They are the ones who have the least disposable cash to absorb the rise in costs. They are the ones who have been hit hardest by the oversupply represented by weekend taxi drivers who have full-time jobs elsewhere, or people who bought up large numbers of licences and rent them out. It is these people, the backbone of the industry, who are there not just there on the Saturday night to bring you home after the pub, but on the Monday dawn when you are in a rush to the airport. They are being hit, and they are being hit the hardest. It is from their ranks come the people who see no better way than to end their lives in this post-Celtic tiger collapse. I wish to also raise an issue very important to me, which I've raised with you, Minister, again and again, and mentioned in my speech again on the Good Friday Agreement last night. This bill will see people who were convicted of offences as part of the conflict, who were recognised by the Good Friday Agreement and its terms, being asked to appeal to keep their licence or being barred from entering the industry. Minister, this is wrong. The Good Friday Agreement, which this state signed up to and has a duty to uphold, is clear about opposing barriers to employment for former political prisoners. The people overwhelmingly backed that agreement. You, Minister, and Minister Varadkar have shown little regard for the Good Friday Agreement in this case. But it's time that you did. And last night you indicated that you support the Good Friday Agreement. Well, I'd like you to put your money where your mouth is, please. They are putting the livelihood of you're putting the livelihood of many families at risk. There are quite a large number of former political prisoners who have found work as taxi drivers. They have worked without issue for years. They are known to be pillars of their community, hard-working and honest. They should not have to beg for their job. I'm a former political prisoner. Many leading members of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil in the past were former political prisoners when they served in this House. I asked last night, am I not fit to be a taxi driver? I ask you today, was Michael Collins, Richard Mulcahy, Joe McGrath, Crunchies de Rossa, Eamon de Valera or Seamus Lamass not fit to drive taxis? All former political prisoners. The Minister has in the past said that this is a matter for the Minister for Justice and spent convictions legislation. This is bluff and rubbish.
Is it so? And Shannon never even raised it.
Well, we have plenty of time for amendments. This has been raised 1,000 times yourself. You know this. Don't be passing the buck. All legislation through this House should honour the international agreements signed by this state. You did sign the international agreement. This government signed it. Everyone signed up to it. Would you argue it was a matter for Lucinda Creighton if a bill you produced went against an EU treaty? In the North, a similar attempt was made to bar political prisoners from driving taxis. Daniel McComb took a case against this and won. Similar laws in the state here as in the North. It was ruled that the state had no right to discriminate in this manner. Given the Irish constitutional protection for the right to make a living, then I have no doubt a similar case will be successful in this state should this section of the bill go forward. and I have no doubt such a case will be brought. I call on the Minister, if he wants to avoid this, to look again at his approach and to exclude those covered by the Good Friday Agreement. I or my party could support no bill which puts up barriers to former political prisoners. I welcome the Minister's position now in regards to the transferability of licences. I think it's important. I think it's something that the industry have looked for, and I look forward to looking at these amendments. I also would look forward to seeing what the company transfer entails, because it has been a big issue that there was an uneven playing field. And I think it certainly needs to be addressed, and I need to study what you are saying. I also wanted to ask you in regards to the rural Hackney taxi licence, which was Section 46 of the Taxi Review Group. What is planned? Can you outline to us what the plan is here? Because there's an argument to say we're creating a three-tier taxi system. We have taxis, we have Hackneys, and now we have rural Hackney licence. And the rules in regards to the rural Hackney licences will be a lot less stringent, a lot less costly on people. Now, I'm not for 1 minute dismissing it. I need to hear the bones of it. I need to know what it entails and what this entails for particularly rural Ireland, because we know a lot of people are struggling. A lot of the industry, the pub industry, is which is social, the real social background in communities. So I'd like to just hear more on that. I've said for a long time that there's a need for a vetting bill. We have in many European countries. Spain, for instance, will only allow citizens, a person who's a citizen, to drive a taxi. In other European countries, there's a rule you must be at least 5 years within the country. And I'm not saying that's what we'll settle on, but I do think we have to look. If it's fair that a person in this country is vetted, it's fair that everyone is vetted right across the board, no matter who or what they are. And I think that there's an argument out there that it's been unfairly done when it comes to people who actually who live in this country. So I'd like to put that to you again. Could we look at this, and could we start working towards that? Because other industries have it, the security industries have it, and I think it's only fair we should ask for it. In regards to the spaces, I'm glad to hear about your rollback on the demerits. I think it would have caused major problems, because we have a huge lacking in spaces across all the major cities, and we know that there's problems there in O'Connell Street. That taxi rank is going to